Hey, everybody, welcome to the Growing with Fishes podcast, episode 210. This week we have Jake Williams with us, and he's written an awesome paper on the visions for aquaponics and the vision of the future of aquaponics. It's really cool, and he's here to talk about it with us. Thanks a lot for joining us all the way from England.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me on, Steve. I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah, I think you might be our first. Oh no, you're not. We've had only I think one other person so far to date from England, and that was Gypsy Nirvana, I think, is the only other person we've had on from England. So you're very much an esteemed company, my friend.
Oh.
So please tell us more about what you do and about your paper. You're an aspiring student wanting to get into aquaponics. You've been working hard, doing a lot of research, and why don't you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I'm just kind of finishing my undergraduate degree at university, and so I was just like, we had to do a dissertation for our final year, and so I picked mine on aquaponics. And yeah, so it was basically just exploring the kind of like visions that like stakeholders and sort of practitioners have for the field. And it kind of, the reason that kind of came about is that during like the literature review, I sort of found kind of two key issues almost that I thought I'd like to focus on. And so one was a sort of a paper that kind of found like a sort of lack of vision for the field to be quite an issue. So they found that in sort of Europe especially, well, the paper was set in Europe, that they found that many of their participants often had differing like sort of ideas for the future of aquaponics and kind of what they saw as desirable. And they kind of highlighted that this could be kind of an issue because you could have people kind of pulling in different directions, you know, sort of, or investing in different areas that kind of sort of kind of like mutually exclusive almost and kind of counterproductive. And so that they kind of saw that as being sort of a risk to aquaponics ever sort of fledging kind of like as a technology and really kind of delivering its sustainability or like food security potentials. And so they kind of in that seemed like there needed to be like a vision for the field. And then there was another paper as well that I read that was kind of challenged the idea of sort of aquaponics as kind of being like an inherently sustainable technology. And so they kind of saw a lot more of the sort of research that was coming out of like current research, focusing a lot on sort of productivity and kind of like commercial viability. And so they kind of saw that as maybe potentially being an issue by sort of ignoring other factors that are wrapped up in like sort of sustainability and food security. So kind of they made a point that if aquaponics focuses solely on commercial viability, and that that, say for example, could be achieved by focusing solely on sort of gourmet or sort of like specialty food. And whilst that's, you know, that producing that food sustainably is like better than not, if that makes sense, it kind of limits the extent to which aquaponics can really be used to help sort of bring about sort of more sustainable food production and really help in sort of food security. So they argued that there was a kind of need to kind of consider like those sort of potentials and bring them kind of to the forefront of any research and development. So kind of wrapped up in those two issues, there kind of seemed to be a need for a sort of reorientation or sort of a real effort to give like the field a real vision sort of what, you know, of what its goals should, what the goals are, what people in the field would like the technology to achieve. And then going from that, that can kind of mobilize action towards like really achieving those like sustainability and food security potentials. So my research was kind of focusing on, well, what do people actually want for the field, and like what kind of ideas within them are kind of sustainable, so that if there ever was like a sort of like a visioning sort of project in the future, that there was at least a little bit of research that could like sort of draw upon or be like a sort of basis for further research. So yeah, so that was kind of the sort of motivation almost for the research.
Whoop, sorry, muted my window trying to unmute my mic. So what I guess what initially made you decide to move towards aquaponics and to, decide that as a point of study
So
for the paper?
yeah, so I kind of I was just kind of searching for an idea really, and I think like a something popped on sort of like a TV show like just during that time when I was searching, and it was like an aquaponics farm in the UK, and and they were just speaking about they were just speaking about sort of the actual system, the processes, and they were mentioning like really cool facts like using kind of like the same water for like 4.5 years and things like that, like kind of like really like kind of like catching your attention kind of sort of facts. And then also kind of like during my sort of studies and stuff, becoming more and more aware of sort of like sustainable food production and the kind of the importance of it. It kind of that's kind of what my studies kind of gravitated to, and I found like really quite interesting. Um, so when I was researching more and more into aquaponics, it kind of just happened naturally, I guess. I don't really know. It just um, kind of ticked all the boxes of stuff that I found interesting, and it seemed like a new field, and there was sort of new like there was like more research needed to be done. It seemed important, so it seemed like a worthwhile dissertation project in the end.
So what are some of the different visions? You had a chance to interview how many different people was it?
So it was like 26 people in the end.
Awesome, awesome. So what are some of the different um, directions and maybe some of the big points? Or maybe do you want to start off maybe some of the questions that you asked first to try and discern that? Maybe that's a better place to start.
Yeah, so I kind of started off asking people kind of like their reasons for kind of like entering aquaponics, and also kind of what they envisioned the role to be for aquaponics. So for in regard to like the role, obviously like food production came out as like sort of the major one, which is kind of to be expected, I guess. And so like within that, there was like a lot of emphasis on like local food, which was quite interesting, and so people wanting it to be like some people want it to be like located in cities or sort of the outskirts of cities, and then some people again were like sort of really focusing on sort of community gardening, which is really interesting, and then bringing into like tying into like the sort of social aspects of that as well. So being able to use it as like educational reasons, or sort of to be able to help people like sort of connect and like have more cohesion in communities. um, and then and also there's a big emphasis on sort of like aquaponics producing conventional food, so it not just producing sort of like speciality or niche food, but actually being a sort of conventional and mainstream way of producing food that people could go to the local store, or like the Whole Foods shop or supermarket or something, and like actually buy like aquaponics food, like aquaponic produce, and it's not to be like um, something that only like that's more expensive than any other type of food. So that was really interesting because something that like I was saw in my kind of research was that there was like concerns almost of it being boxed in as like a sort of gourmet food or sort of niche food thing, which I thought, well, I mean, I kind of have a really like sort of I've only entered this sphere for like just under a year of my life really. I don't really have the best insight almost, but it seemed almost like that was kind of quite limiting for its potential almost. So that was really cool to see that there is that sort of within the community, or the people that I spoke to anyway, there's that kind of drive to make it actually quite like accessible, which is really cool. um but then also people kind of like didn't want it just to produce like food products. They also saw it as like non-food products, which is where it was getting quite interesting, and like having people discuss like using aquaponics to produce algae for like biodiesel and stuff like that. That was quite interesting. Using it to produce medicines, cannabis. I think we spoke about essential oils and sort of those kind of like more outside the box kind of uses of aquaponics is like really quite interesting. Um, so yeah, so then after like speaking about like the role that that people wanted aquaponics to fulfill in society. There was also, I asked people about like where they saw aquaponics being like located. So because in one of the research papers that I'd read before, there was kind of like a big issue about where people wanted aquaponics to be located, and like predominantly, this was quite split actually. So some people saw it being like a sole sort of urban kind of technology, so only using it in urban scenarios. And there was some interesting kind of like critiques of that like people brought up. So one of them was that whilst like, you know, we all hear about sort of rooftop farming and it's like, oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but really the, you know, people, if they're living in a city, they might not want like sort of like a big farm next door to where they live or their apartment or above their apartment or something. It might be that there might not be a lot of like sort of public acceptance of having these kind of industrial activities kind of like quite close to where they live. So that seemed like a sort of challenge that some people brought up, which was quite interesting.
I think one other thing to add to that is that I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of sheer air pollution that can actually affect the quality of their produce when producing in a heavily urban area. There's a lot of car pollution and everything else, and you can actually accumulate a lot of those different pollutants in the tissue depending on your city and the wind and the plant. You could actually grow something that over time could be a problem. And that's something else that people kind of forget about in some of the urban areas that they try to grow stuff. They don't account for the fact that there's a factory next door spewing who knows what into the air that might be okay for what they're doing as far as air, but it's going to accumulate onto the leaves and cause problems.
Yeah, and I guess if people are like consuming that every day, it's kind of like it builds up over time. Yeah.
We have similar problems with cannabis grows near freeways with cadmium and mainly cadmium off catalytic converters, slowly getting into the air and then accumulating into the resin, and you can actually test for it. It's that high on a high frequency highway. So people forget about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I guess as well, and maybe like sort of, country like cities that really do have like air pollution problems, like sort of like I guess like places in India or something like that, where there's like really, really bad like air pollution. It just exacerbates the issue like completely.
Yep, and then people don't want to grow the plants that actually will clean the air and perpetuate snowballs, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Yeah, and then there was kind of people that, and then there was kind of sort of people that were dead set of like, oh yeah, it needs to be used in urban areas. We need to like, make the most amount of, it makes no sense to use productive land for like, to produce food if we don't have to. If we can make it more efficient, let's just do that. And then there's other people that are like, oh no, like, it can be done in urban areas, that's quite good. But, if we want to grow these, like, if we want to have these like massive sort of industrial scale, like hectares, like farms, there's no room in like urban areas for that. Like we need to use like rural regions and like expand out. And so that was kind of like an interesting kind of like sort of conflict almost that might underlie those two, because you've got people that are kind of like almost really against using any productive land, and then it's hard to see how you can have hectares size like sort of facilities that are like produced that aren't using like productive land at all. So it's like part of the dissertation as well was like finding kind of differences between people's visions to kind of help guide sort of any sort of consensus building that would occur like during a visioning thing. Because when people do have those kind of goals or like visions that are kind of a bit irreconcilable almost, it's kind of seems important to like understand what values like underpin them, so then you can be like, oh well, we do this and we can kind of like address both of these issues at the same time. So so that was quite interesting seeing how like kind of diverse those like kind of visions were for where they wanted the places to be. There was like, oops, sorry, Stephen.
Was there any other large dichotomies, or any other similar type kind of people are in one camp or the other?
So there was with like the technological sophistication, there was like there was some people that were like sort of like, oh, die hard, like I want it, let's go as high tech as possible, like like sort of like complete automation, like using Internet of Things, like sensors, all that stuff, remote operations. So like some people just wanted to be able to go on their phone and check on their farm and be like, oh, it's okay, it's all good and stuff. And then there was like on the flip side, there was people that were like, like people do this, but it's almost like, it's not it's not what we want. It's not like the best way to do it. It's like kind of, they almost thought that it kind of, I remember we spoke, Stephen, I don't know, mind if you hear me saying, but we spoke and it was like, it kind of just kind of automates like problems into catastrophes rather than kind of like really addressing the issues as much as possible. And it kind of just makes the system a bit more sort of vulnerable and like just vulnerable to collapse, I guess.
Yeah, I've put a lot of automation on reef tanks, and I've seen them where someone didn't account for one of the sensors or didn't account for one of the variables that the system was, and suddenly it's trying to fix that, and then it keeps dosing X, Y, or Z. One example would be converting a saltwater tank to a freshwater tank with the auto top off, because of an overflow problem, and some other examples like that. But you can very quickly, especially with pH, automated pH changers and stuff like that. If the probe gets out of calibration, or this, that, or the other, you can really rapidly kill stuff. So, or fish feeding. That's the other number one for something that takes 15 seconds to do. That is your main nutrient input on your entire system. If that gets moldy or fails, you just lost your main nutrient input. That's crazy. The amount of labor time that's saved by that is not worth the amount of liability compared to like automating some other system, like harvesting or something else, where that okay, there's a lot of labor time, but the liability if something goes wrong is very minor, right? So okay, we lost a couple heads of lettuce, but okay, out of 5,000 heads of lettuce, we lost 12. Okay, well, that's acceptable, right? No big deal. With that, you just have to really weigh the liability and how much money are we realistically saving by automating this thing. If it's costing me 30 minutes a week for worth of employee time to have a human observe what the fish reaction is, especially with fish feeding, if the fish come up and they have a fast reaction and feed right away, I know they're healthy, they're happy. But if they don't feed, or if they're sluggish or whatever, I know something's wrong with my water chemistry without even testing anything. So that's a great indicator where, okay, now I need to go do additional, scouting to figure out what's going wrong. Maybe my heater failed. Maybe there's a dead fish that's clogging the thing. Maybe something, maybe a rat fell in and died and spiked the ammonia. I don't know. It could be any number of things, but who knows? But something's wrong, right? So just that indicator for something that costs me 30 minutes of labor a week, that it's not worth the liability in the data point. It's just not. So people are trying to automate stuff that is very cheap labor wise, and not automating things that are expensive labor wise. And that's more, I guess, what I mean by that is being really smart about what you do automate, and then not just automating for the sake of automating. I think a lot of people love to do, and it's cool from just inventing things. And I'm into steampunk and making stuff. Like, I love all that, right? Like, don't get me wrong, but there's a time and place for that, and your commercial facility is not the time and place.
Yeah. I think I heard like a phrase that it was like technological tinkerers, and it is like used to describe like the sort of hobbyist aquaponics that were like really loving the sort of automation. I thought it like described it quite well. Like, but yeah, so it was quite interesting, like seeing seeing almost the people that were like really like sort of hardcore, like are like see it as like a sort of, I don't know, it kind of reminds, like they kind of see it as like, I kind of it reminds you almost of like sort of entrepreneurs almost, and like Elon Musk's and people like that are really like for technology. And then on the flip side, there's kind of people that I guess like yourself, you kind of have like a moderate of like, oh yeah, let's use like bits of both, like where it's like most optimal almost. Whereas like there was like a sort of smaller minority where they were like, oh no, like low tech is like where it's at, like we should just keep doing low tech and stuff. And it's more we never really got to the bottom of why like low tech was completely better, complete low tech. but yeah, so that was kind of like an interesting dichotomy of like where there was like some people that are really for something and then some people against. But then also there was kind of like, it was the majority of people as well were sort of like in the middle of being like, oh, you know, both, you know, depending on the context as well. Like, I guess like a lot of people were saying like, you know, in like more affluent countries, like, yeah, let's use where we can use higher tech, you know, if it makes it more productive or more sustainable. But, you know, in sort of less affluent countries, like, you know, there's not really the sort of means or the sort of, to be able to use like high tech really. So we need sort of low tech solutions as well. And that's kind of like, while like the sort of focus on just pure commercial viability, you know, that could be problematic, I guess, because it kind of like might sort of cause like de-investment of like sort of, you know, research into those low tech options that might have like more application in those sort of like less affluent contexts where, you know, you where aquaponics does have like a really good potential to like help secure like people's nutrition and food security as well. Yeah, so there was kind of like that. So that was like an interesting dichotomy. There was like some interesting things with like the size of facilities as well. Like some people really envision like these massive like football stadium size like aquaponic facilities, and then, you know, down to sort of like people were like like they described them as like mum and pop shops. So like having just like quite small ones that are kind of like family run and kind of like these like small sort of like nice like aquaponic facilities. And then even kind of to like the household level, so like one person saw like it would be like really ideal to have like automated systems within a household so that people could just go and grab like some lettuce and then go make their lunch or whatever, or grab a fish and cook them in their dinner. But having it completely like automated so that they didn't need to have much knowledge. It's almost like if it broke down, you'd call like, it's like, say you've got like a dishwasher, you'd call like the sort of maintenance repairman and they'll come and fix your aquaponic facility and stuff like that. So that was quite interesting because that was quite like different to like what other people had been saying and stuff. And yeah, and then yeah, so there was a bit of like differences as well in sort of certification. I remember we spoke a bit about it, Stephen, where we were saying about how like an aquaponic specific certification might be like needed and stuff, just so you can like start kind of setting the standards of like what's right, what's good practice, what's bad practice, and kind of like like sort of standardizing kind of the practice of aquaponics. And so there's quite a few people that kind of saw like a aquaponic specific certification as kind of a real like sort of next step, and it kind of something that had to happen like as soon as possible really. And some people kind of saw that like if consumers knew that this produce was aquaponically produced and they knew what aquaponics was, then they'd be like really interested in buying it and consuming it, which is quite interesting because I think that's quite like aligned with like the actual research now as well. Like it seems that there is quite like a positive perspective of people for like aquaponic produce and like the idea of aquaponics. But also like that's aquaponic specific certification is like not really like prevalent in the literature like at all. Like no one's talked about it. It's all just like organic certification really, and it's like how do we make organic work? And so that was quite interesting having like more of a majority being like, oh no, like I'd like aquaponics specific. Like I don't think organic's the way to go like as much, which is really interesting.
That is really interesting. In fact, just to clarify, there is an organic certified EU aquaponic cannabis facility called Symbiosid in Switzerland that is EU GMP'd aquaponic organic certified organic. They're the only ones in the
Wow.
EU. And then you have in Canada, the only other currently certified organic aquaponic facility that is certified organic that can sell medical cannabis. There's only two, Symbiosid and Habitat Life in British Columbia. There's a company in Oklahoma that falsely claims that they are organic certified. They were organic certified before they grew cannabis. They are no longer organic certified because cannabis is Schedule I, which immediately disqualifies you from organics in the United States. So why there's 3 people that claim it, only 2 of them are actually certified. So,
Well, it's so cool. I wonder how they kind of got past like
but they
how they
don't. I
got.
mean, they're risking immense amount of liability by making that claim because they're not. So they could get sued or shut down by the
Mm,
USDA for that. But again, you can have certified hemp in the United States, but you can't do medical cannabis. And once you're above 0.3%, you cannot claim or certified organic. Now there are state organic certifications that you can claim, but there cannot claim federal USDA organic. No one is medical cannabis USDA organic in the United States
mm,
because of the Schedule 1. Until that gets changed, that is the case. So it is kind of a weird area. Here's the other thing: you can't do cannabis and aquaponics and have your meat processing facility license because meat processing is a federal regulated thing. So in the United States, you can't slaughter your own fish and process them as a legal aquaponic cannabis facility because of that regulation. You have to send it off to a third party, which is a
oh,
weird legal loophole, which I'm sure no politician or legislator had intended.
mm,
They wouldn't do that, right? Like it's just that makes no business sense from even from a regulatory standpoint. It just makes no sense, right? It's goofy, but it's
mm.
something that is kind of a weird pigeonhole side effect of the different regulations that they have between aquaponics, cannabis, and aquaculture. That it ends up in this little pinhole of a weird middle area, and
Yeah, I remember I remember you saying, Stephen, about there was like a sort of need to get more sort of lobbying from like aquaponic like practitioners to like sort of government like officials and change policy because it does seem like like you say like with that example it's like there are just those weird loopholes that kind of like that do pigeonhole aquaponics and don't really help it and like really support its growth or anything.
Yeah, and what's funny is that the organic guys want to come in and claim, oh well, it doesn't mineralize nutrients. Well, it does. And oh well, it doesn't have microbes. Well, we actually, according to NASA's study, have 168% more microbial biodiversity in terms of number of species. So we take that argument off the table. Oh, well, we're not doing soil. Well, anyone doing any flowering crops, anything with heavy amounts of lignin, is using soil. They're using dual root zone. It's the only way to do it. And certainly
Mm,
anyone that's doing any kind of performance crop, cannabis or something like that, needs the dual root zone so that they can supplemental feed those different strains. If I have a heavy feeding wedding cake next to a low feeding Durban, I want to be able to power feed that wedding cake to make sure it can come out at the same yield as the Durban, right? And without a dual root zone to power feed it, I have no control enough to do that. I'm just going to I'm going to be at the mercy of whatever is going to grow well, which is not a place you want to be if I'm a commercial producer, right? That's might be fine for lettuce, but doesn't work for what I do. So, all of these arguments are just garbage. And what I really think we need to
mm,
start doing is changing our language and saying we don't have, it's not soil this, we grow aquatic soil. We're growing an aquatic soil, that's all, or
mm,
aqua soil. I mean, that's the difference because microbially, that's exactly what we're doing. It's much
mm,
more akin to soil on a microbial level than it is to a hydro solution. Certainly, if we're talking about chemical reactions and mineralization, it's way more similar to mineralization to soil than it is a hydro solution in terms of how it interacts with the plant. So let's
mm,
start talking that way. You know what I mean?
mm.
Like this isn't like we need to just change the way that we're presenting the argument in the first place and change the words we're using.
Yeah, it seems like they're really hung up on the sort of like the soil aspect of it, which seems just a bit like it just simplifying the whole kind of thing. Like I don't, so much more about the sort of microbial interactions than I do, Stephen. But it's like from like investigating slightly into like the organic reasons for it. It's almost them saying that there needs to be that kind of like natural interactions between like microbes and sort of those natural sort of ecosystem processes, but it seems that aquaponics really does take advantage of that, and that's kind of integral in the whole process of aquaponics. So it doesn't really make too much sense, like to me, really, like why they other than if it is like a commercial threat. Really, at the end of the day, I don't know. I can't really see any other
Oh
reason
yeah,
why.
and that's really all it is they want a monopoly on their thing that they're used to having a monopoly on. That's what it comes down to is greed. There is no other justification for it than greed, and it's just that simple. And then you have a big problem with the religion of organics versus the science of organic, and they are often two very different things. Especially if you've anyone here has heard anyone speak on cannabis and organics. I mean, some of the goofy ass nonsensical BS that people talk about on the organic side that's just completely invented on, bubble gum drops and fairy dreams, with no basis on science. But it gets preached all the time, and
Mm,
taken as fact by a lot of soil growers. And it's not based on science.
mm,
Let's use a great example of horsetail being the best source for um, silica on your property for ferments or teas, right? Everyone talks about, horsetail for that. It's actually not. Stinging nettle has over 4 times as much per gram of biomass. So,
mm.
there's a lot of stuff out there that the organic people have just kind of taken as a religion. Like I heard that, so that's true, right? Like, but no one's ever actually proven any of it. And there's a lot of stuff in my book I'm working on to try and dispel a lot of that, because it's frustrating, especially when it comes to aquaponics. There's so much bad information, it's hard to find any good information.
Yeah. I think that was like a major thing that some of the participants said as well, especially with aquaponics, is kind of like, getting a more sort of a resource that you can like have a bit more like a standardized sort of knowledge source almost, that, producers and sort of practitioners can go to and be like, oh, this is like, I know this to be true, or like, this is pretty well established. And so everyone's kind of got like one
I,
source they can go to almost.
yeah, and I think that especially for pesticides, I think it is time for a whitelist for our industry, because one, the fish involvement, two, look at and this is something I gave a talk on, God, 3 years ago now, at the Aquaponics Association, where I came out and said, look, the cannabis industry got railroaded by regulation because they sat back and they did not get out ahead of it. And aquaponics is very much the threat of that happening, where you could have one incident and suddenly they come in and heavy-handedly regulate us, or regulate us out of existence entirely because
Mm,
of one incident. So what do? We need to come out with whitelists for pesticides, and maybe even for mineral inputs, to guarantee that we're limiting the liability on that. Say, look, we have, there is a well-established research on these pesticides being safe to use in commercial settings when used as directed. So we can start here, and you can apply for something, and has these standards to be added to the list, and whatever, the same way that
mm,
cannabis does. And then this way it takes away a lot of the liability from the producers as well, and onto the state and the regulator in terms of deciding on that as well, which, again, if it's going to come back onto lawsuits long term in fruit production, this isn't now, but this is an industry issue. Let's put that liability on the state, right? Like,
yeah.
it just makes sense financially and business wise. It's much better, for a business to have that liability on them. As long as we're following best practices, we're kind of protected as a company. And so it
Mm,
helps save us as well from, and it doesn't matter if I'm growing lettuce or cannabis, that helps me, right? It doesn't matter. So this is
mm,
the kind of stuff where we need to focus on that. But one thing I would say is that it's also dangerous as well, because look at the accepted pH regimen out there. Most people out there tell you potassium hydroxide, calcium hydroxide. Well, those are actually like not the best at all. Now that we've actually had a chance to actually run a bunch of different stuff and run a bunch of side by sides of things, potassium silicate and calcium carbonate actually is the best in terms of harvest to harvest, reducing pest management issues, and just overall plant health and yield. That is a better model, but it's not what's been preached by the universities, because the universities are only doing very, very narrow-minded stuff based on previous hydroponic or soil research, and they're not actually focusing on like a zoomed out level and just approaching it from a blank slate. And that's
mm,
where I think you see a lot of private industry really leading the way, because they're not pigeonholed by having to wait and finish writing out a paper for 8 more months before they can move on to the next thing, or write out a whole data report, or all the other paperwork side of things that make the college stuff great, from the terms of being able to back it up and say, this is 100% the way it is, and you can pick it apart 6 ways till next Tuesday, and here's all
mm,
the data. And it's great for that, but it's horrible if you're trying to push and invent new things and quickly push ahead. It's restrictive. And that's one of the things
mm,
the reason why I stopped working with a lot of universities with my own personal research is it's too slow. I
mm,
can work with a company that has a private research lab and do jumps and leaps and bounds 10 times faster. It's just, and I think there needs to be a way to figure out how can we marry those two things and allow both of those things to happen, or allow universities to start to speed up some of the industry research that needs to happen, in a way that's also feasible from the data side. And I think that that's really one of the biggest challenges right now is the fact that, everything on aquaponics is still stuck doing bib lettuce.
Mm,
How there's probably, you could probably count on one or maybe even two hands the number of aquaponic papers currently going on or research things going on that are around lettuce. Like,
mm,
why? Like, we got to get off of this. We got to move on to other stuff. And it's kind of something holding everything back. I just don't understand.
mm. That's like, yeah, like that's really interesting. Like when I one of the questions I asked was kind of like what produce do you see kind of like that aquaponics is producing, and there was kind of like two camps in that as well. Like there was the people that were like, let's focus on like lettuce, that's where our main market is. But then there was like a similar sized group of people being like, no, we need to like move beyond lettuce now. Like we need to get beyond it and start producing fruit and really focusing on other vegetables that so it is interesting seeing that like sort of focus on lettuce, but like also as you were saying about like sort of about sort of with the sort of with having this with the universities and then with the sort of private institutions as well, it's sort of those kind of that was mentioned a couple of times, especially in the visions, and I think it does seem like a really important point. But an issue with the research that I did was that it was kind of focused on like the general themes and general trends. So because there was quite a few people as well in the research, it meant that it kind of missed those kind of important and like nuanced kind of like points that needed to be made about sort of making aquaponics a more sort of centralized and sort of more formalized field, if that makes sense, and actually getting people together to actually like lobby and actually come together and be like, we need to make these sort of decisions. And yeah, so I think it's really important that like those visions and stuff, they seem so valuable to like actually progressing the field and making sure that it can achieve its like potentials really.
So what are some of the other interesting points you had come across on there? I got some notes and stuff pulled up, but I figured, is there any other interesting or maybe other big takeaways that you found or were kind of profound from the different points of view?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it seemed like the visions were kind of like quite moderate really. There wasn't like sort of any sort of like really profound kind of things that I came across, but there was some like really kind of like interesting ideas for like the future of aquaponics. So like one person kind of saw the sort of the fish and the sort of the fish and the sort of the fish and the plant interaction as kind of being one step, and then they also wanted to take it a bit further and do sort of what they call like multi-trophic sort of food production. So kind of introducing sort of using worms as like to like break down any waste from it and then feeding the worms to the fish, and then also growing like mushrooms off of any waste as well and selling them. And so they kind of had this interesting idea of kind of making an ecosystem that could produce food almost, which is I thought that was really interesting. And they used like an interesting phrase which was like, let's like replicate Mother Nature to kind of like leave her out of it. And so it's quite interesting that they kind of wanted to like create like food systems that really did replicate like sort of like the natural ecosystems, but also just so that you can spare more land, I guess, and spare sort of natural environment so that they can like recover and rewild and stuff. So that was quite interesting.
That's
Um,
that's really cool. I did some research. There's a group called Turtle Island Farms in Colorado, and we did some research on building mushroom greenhouses directly next to aquaponic greenhouses to increase plant production. So we were using the CO2 from the mushroom greenhouse to pump in to make the plants grow faster. And we found that it took about 50% of the size of the greenhouse production to produce enough CO2, not counting the nursery section of the mushrooms, but in order to generate enough CO2 per square foot. So it was about 50% of the space, but it was a really interesting project. Probably one of the only ones that have ever been done,
yeah.
for that kind of applications.
That's really interesting. Like it's kind of like using like a not like a byproduct that you wouldn't really think about using at all. Yeah, that is super interesting.
Well,
It,
if you're a large cannabis operation, you're paying quite a bit per month, either in natural gas or in tank CO2 for supplementing for your plants. If you could generate a revenue off of that and make that either net zero or turn a profit, I mean, that's a huge expense off of your bottom line.
mm. Yeah, I guess that's kind of some of the people were bringing up the idea of like those like a circular economy, I guess. So having like sort of like a beer plant, with any waste that goes from that, and then like sort of using that in your aquaponics facility and stuff like that, and governments needing to sort of zone cities properly and be like, well, if we're putting this here, we need to make sure that things around it can use it at the same time. And so that was really interesting, that kind of seeing that people had these visions that kind of extended, not just extended beyond aquaponics, and were like, oh, we needed to get the government, like the local authority, and in integrated into these, like into our industry or into the industry and stuff. So that was really interesting.
Oh yeah, and aquaponics facilities can be a great way to give back to the community too. In fact, I've worked with multiple cannabis licenses that were donating, 50 or more percentage of their fish production to the local community. If you're fighting for one of 10 cannabis licenses and you're the one guy who's going to come in and donate all your fish to the food pantry and do everything that everyone else is, you're going to get that license. It's not even going to be a contest. So it's a great way, especially if you're fighting for a license, to really have an edge over all your competitors. How is anybody else going to work food production into their model? They can't. It's not going to work. Or in the case of Florida, they're not even allowed to. You can't even grow any other plants in your facility. No rules about fish though. You can't grow any plants in your facility except for cannabis. So
that's so interesting. So there's so that was kind of like some interesting things. And then there was kind of like one person was saying about sort of if they had the opportunity to, like, if someone asked them like, oh, we're going to build a skyscraper of aquaponics, over the next years, do you want to do it? And he'd be like, I'd sign up tomorrow. Like some people really felt like that was like kind of like a really cool vision to have, of like having these like skyscrapers in cities of just like churning out food. And then there was other things of like there was one idea of having sort of aquaponics on like sort of ships that would like sort of sail across the world. And they were saying like going from port to port of where like the best price for the for sort of fish and for those plants and stuff were. And so that they could just like be like, oh, there's it's great prices in sort of, I don't know, great prices in like I can't think, but like say somewhere in New York, there's great prices. We'll sail over the aquaponic ship over to New York, and we'll sell all like our facility, sell all our produce there. So it's really like cool, like interesting ideas like that that I'd like not really come across. So it's really cool to kind of start to like unearth them and stuff, and that was really cool.
I think one other thing for people to focus on is the fact that aquaponics really does seem to push essential oil production. If you're going capsaicin for capsaicin isolation, or some of the other isolated oils and oil isolates and plant isolates, you can immensely increase that. I know we have heavy documentation for multiple terpenes, cannabinoids, and then also capsaicin and peppers being greatly increased by aquaponics. So this is something that needs to be flushed out immensely, but there might be I'm sure there's multiple crops that will almost double their terpene production. In fact, cannabis is one of them that, when it's done right, will over double the total terpene production of the plant in aquaponics, depending on the cultivar. So that can be immensely profitable depending on what your essential oil production and how much it is per gram. So again, that's another area that just hasn't been fully explored that could be heavily exploited.
It's kind of,
there was a lady that we interviewed from Italy who's growing saffron in aquaponics in Italy and getting 4 harvests a year instead of 2. So
it's so cool how like sort of unexplored of a territory it is, almost, in terms of like the research and development. It is like, that's what I found quite exciting, is that even just like do my research, like I got to speak to kind of like quite prominent people in the field and stuff. So that's like such an opportunity that you don't really always get when you enter like fields and stuff. So it is so cool how sort of new and novel it all is, and that there is so much room to explore.
So is there any other notable points before I go through questions?
Yeah, I mean, like there was the people kind of mentioned a lot that there was like like a kind of a need for more sort of like formalization of the field is probably the best way to put it. So sort of getting the sort of central body that could like set standards for aquaponics and be like promote best practice and identify best practice, and then also kind of like with that kind of creating a sort of knowledge resource where practitioners can go to and it being clear, because some people kind of pointed out that they found real difficulty that with actually kind of identifying what's right to do. They'd say that, they'd have to take stuff from like aquaculture, like research journals, and take stuff from hydroponics. There was nothing really just for like actually aquaponics where it could like put all that information together, and they wouldn't have to go through trial and error of being like, oh, this works here, this doesn't. And that kind of seems like, especially if it's ever going to take off fully, it seems like, having it kind of that knowledge like really accessible and kind of, accessible to sort of practitioners is going to be really important really for the field to ever like sort of grow and uptake to increase. But yeah, so that was quite an important point that I think that people are making. And also kind of the need for farmers to kind of create a coalition so that it can lobby government a bit more and actually change policy so it does actually support, and it's like nurturing the kind of field to grow. And it's funny, like they're the kind of ideas that unfortunately I wasn't able to cover like in my dissertation, because we only have a certain limit of words, but there were so many interesting ideas that it was kind of like, it was so difficult to know like what to put in, or like, to like, you want to kind of like, you want to flesh out everything really and be like, this is important, like, this is revision and stuff. But unfortunately you've got to really like narrow down to like some of the basic things. So
on that note, what else hit the cutting room floor then? That sounds really interesting.
I think they were kind of the main ones. I mean, some people were quite concerned about the fish welfare as well. They thought that like that could be like something that needs like more research into, making like natural kind of like environments for the fish, and like, like making sure there's like day and night cycles so that they're actually get, proper like sort of getting in sort of proper diurnal cycles. And so that was quite interesting. And I think that's quite important as well. It seems that, consumers are going to be quite concerned almost about the fish welfare. I know there's like some research that's seen that people in cities, like in one city anyway, I think it was maybe Berlin or something, that people were kind of, that was something that put them off, was like sort of cultivating livestock in a city is quite like sort of off-putting for some people. So I mean, like mitigating that as much as possible and being like, oh no, these fish, like, they're happy, they live like good lives and stuff, is the best way. It kind of one person brought up an interesting point of being like, what, like there's kind of like a rise of sort of veganism, and sort of is aquaponics probably wouldn't fall into that category, I guess, of veganism. So it's kind of, trying to mitigate those things about fish welfare and stuff, and trying to ensure that, people actually do believe that they're living good lives, and it's like a sort of, it is a positive thing. So that was quite interesting as well. Yeah, but I'm just trying to, there's so many like small ideas and stuff that, it's kind of, I'm just trying to think back on them now, but it's quite hard to like to pick them out in particular. I think that's kind of like the majority of the main ones now.
Sorry about that. I didn't realize I was muted. So you had a couple of different themes here on your paper. Do you kind of want to go through those?
In
That
terms of the
was
sort of
interesting.
results, sorry, Stephen.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Was that in terms of the results, sorry, of the themes?
Yeah, I was looking at your second appendix here. You went through the different things. You kind of made your main points were the, as widespread as possible, trying to spread it farther by 2030. Normalizing it in society as part of daily life. It's still kind of seen more as an exotic thing. What increased uptake, quadruple and uptake across the world. Explain us more about that.
Yeah, so that was quite interesting. So like that was I think it was only bar one person. All the participants wanted aquaponics to become like more widespread or more like prolific, which makes sense. I mean, like if people like sort of engaged in research and actually like invested their time and money and effort into like sort of aquaponics, it makes sense that people are going to be like, oh yeah, well we want it to see it like boom. They have faith in it. So like, but something that was quite interesting is people had different ideas about like how sort of like widespread they wanted it to be. Like we use 2030 as a sort of way to ground the kind of visions. as like a sort of year to focus on. But some people saw like aquaponics as being like the same size as like hydroponics, like fulfilling that kind of role. Some people saw it as like completely replacing hydroponics, so it'd be kind of like so completely replacing it. And some people then again saw it as like starting to replace like conventional agriculture, and so they wanted normal farm, like soil-based conventional farmers, to start to switch over to aquaponics. And yeah, so that was quite interesting seeing like the sort of disparity. I mean, in terms of goal setting, it seems like important that like any vision kind of does establish a sort of one where it's like, oh, we can all get behind being like, yeah, this seems like realistic and achievable, and you know, this is good, a good one to go for. So the thing you just mentioned is just the kind of different descriptors that people used. You know, the interesting one was like seeing it more normalized in society. You know, people still see it as like an exotic thing, and so people wanted it to. Some participants want it to be like when people, you know, you say aquaponics, people are like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Like I found like speaking about my dissertations to like friends and stuff, I'm still explaining quite a lot, but it seems like, you know, I imagine more often there are people that are like, oh yeah, I've heard of aquaponics, I know what that is. So it does seem like it's getting out there and getting more widespread and more knowledgeable. But and then so that was like the main theme. And then there was also things about like, you know, increasing consumer awareness of aquaponics. Like that seemed really important to people, because it seems like, you know, you've got to kind of create the sort of market base. You've got to have like people willing to purchase the actual produce and actually like excite, like, you know, wanting to go for it. And especially like if there maybe has to be a price premium at the start, because you know the technology is still developing, then you know you've kind of you need people to be passionate about it and think it's a good thing and think it's sustainable and be aware of it, to ever kind of like get the field up and running. So some people saw vision as being like, that's where research and sort of that's where we need to put more resource into, is actually like creating that awareness.
That's awesome. Here, let me jump back here. So overcoming niche label. Talked about that. Restricted in ag food industry, respected in the agricultural space. So that's a real big point.
Yeah,
For
so that's
sure.
quite interesting. So that I think that person sort of, it was interesting that they used the word like respected. It was kind of, I think they wanted to see aquaponics being less like a novelty and more as a serious way of producing food, and sort of something that people could like really get on board with. I think that it's just interesting words that they use of like respected. It seems that you know, like, you know, aquaponics maybe still is seen as a sort of a novelty almost, and something that, you know, it still needs more work on. So I think that a lot of it was kind of like, we want to see aquaponics be as established way of producing food, and we don't want it to fizzle out. So that was quite that was quite an interesting interesting take on it as well. And it was like kind of overcoming the idea of it being a niche as well, and being a niche way of producing food. So it's quite interesting. So all those things you're speaking about, Stephen, that's like the appendix to like that, the first major theme, which was like a vision of growth. It's like wanting aquaponics to be more and more sort of more prolific, and those are all just the different descriptors that people use to like articulate that vision, which is quite interesting. But I think that's kind of like the majority of the visions actually that kind of went over. Like I'd love to do more and more research on it again to actually dive into it more. And, you know, like in the visioning like things, like they often do it in like where they do like stakeholder workshops where they get like everyone to come together and they like create the vision together, which is like which would be super interesting to actually get like solid like complete visions almost that everyone could like that you could really like dive into more, because it was a bit difficult like having those disparate visions of like trying to be like, this person says this and this person says that. It's all a bit like mismatched and incomplete almost. So I think any further research would be really interesting to get people to like, get all the sort of key actors together and like everyone to come together and be like, oh, let's like start to understand and like plan this like future for aquaponics. It'd be really interesting.
I think the problem is the aquaponics industry generally doesn't work together on much of anything.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know. Why do you think that is, Stephen? Is it just
What was that?
what? Why is that like it's kind of quite separate? The research institutions, because that's something that came up as well in the research.
So you kind of have a couple issues. One, and someone explained this to me really well, and it has partially to do with the Australian nature of the industry. So in Australia, they have this concept called tall poppy syndrome. So in a poppy field, if you have one poppy that ends up a little bit taller, it's going to screw up your harvest. You cut that head off to keep them all even, right? So all the seed is growing at the same speed. So if you end up getting ahead a little bit, the first thing everyone generally wants to do is criticize you and tell you you're wrong and that you don't know what you're doing and blah blah blah. And then it takes them a long time to actually like try it and then realize that you're right. We went through this quite heavily with the silica stuff. Everyone told me I was crazy. Now everyone is replacing their potassium with potassium silicate for powdery mildew reasons. This is kind of just one quick dirty example, but it's this whole everyone's been doing everything the same way for so long because UVI did it, and that has to be the way, right? And it's just that has to stop. Or you don't need to supplement nutrients. Of course, you need to supplement nutrients. Like nature didn't invent fish poop to grow plants. Like that's not how that was planned out, right? So it wasn't designed for that. You're gonna have missing gaps in your stuff. So sure you can mineralize things differently, but there's just some certain myths out there that or there's no pesticides used. Of course there's pesticides used. They might be biological pesticides. They might, you know what I mean? But you still got to you still have pest management. Pest management doesn't go out the window. I mean, unless you're in a completely biosecure facility, which is not cheap, you're not going to gab that, right? So it's goofy why people make some of the goofy claims that they do about aquaponics when it's just um I just don't understand. And that you got, large commercial companies that push some of these myths still, and it makes no sense.
Mm. Yeah, it seems kind of strange. Like I remember someone saying it's kind of like, UVI, it's kind of like it's kind of stuck maybe a little bit in the past and it like needs to progress more than any research and development.
Yeah, we've had what 35 years or 40 years of research now on mineralization and everything else. Like, especially look at the advent of a lot of the natural farming and ferments and things, and we're learning so much more now that we can make, much better decisions on how to properly mineralize stuff than just, inline, moving beds, stuff like that. It doesn't make sense anymore. So especially at the scales that people want to try to do some of these facilities, it doesn't make sense. And you get and I see the same problem with the cannabis industry too. People that grow a 6 lighter think they can tell you about acres, and it's not, doesn't work that way. Like everything is different. Pest management, nutrients, everything. It just doesn't work.
Mm.
You just have to. There's just some of the stuff where you have people that are trying to replicate really goofy designs, or hey, what might work great for UVI in the tropics might, that doesn't mean it's going to work good somewhere at a different latitude, right? So, there's all these different things, or what might be acceptable for a crop, for lettuce might not get you even 50% of the yield of a performance crop, something that needs to be heavily fed. So, this is the kind of stuff that just needs to be worked out with that kind of stuff. And it's really awesome you had a chance to do this paper and really rip that apart and really get a bunch of different visions from people that kind of are moving ahead in the industry and trying to push their visions forward and make them not just visions, but reality.
Yeah, totally. Like what you're saying about like the like the context dependency like of like aquaponic facilities. That was a big thing that kept coming up. It was like, there's this phrase of like, oh, it depends. Like that was what people used a lot, like speaking about it. And like that's kind of
variables.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. Like it's almost like two kind of like kind of like perspectives on food production that are kind of like that seem to be that seem to be that present as like two visions for aquaponics, I guess. You've got like the one where it's like, it's really contextual. We need to be like attuned to kind of like our own context of food production and sort of, I don't know, like one thing that works for this farmer won't work for another. And it's kind of been really like in tune with your own system and kind of like I remember one researcher's almost talked about as if like, it's like when you see like those kind of farmers when they go through sort of, agroecology where like using ecosystem processes to really boost performance. They're really like in tune with like their land almost and their soil and, their crops. And so there's like the sort of that side to the aquaponics, but then there's also researchers that are like, no, we need to make everything standardized. We need to make, remove the context and keep it like really sort of, so we can scale it up really. And it's kind of interesting. There are these two visions and that seem to be there. And it depends. I don't know. That might be taking them a bit too extreme. Like there's maybe room in between, I guess. But there's like these two different visions. So I think like it would be interesting to see like, which vision kind of like dominates as well in the field and like which is more like optimal, I guess, as well. That'd be maybe some like future research would be really interesting as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the gosh, I had a really good point and then I lost it there. That's all right. But on the scalability, oh no, I lost it again. I'll think of it again. But let me jump back here to your paper. I know you're almost out of time here. I know it's getting quite late over there in Europe. But was there any last takeaways, or maybe closing points, or maybe kind of overarching conclusions you had with the paper, and then maybe any research papers or research points that were or maybe stuck out that are relevant that you found what we'll do in the research side. You kind of touched
So
a little bit on that earlier.
yeah, so I guess like the big overall conclusion is like, there are some like points of like, agreement, like people wanting it to be more like people wanting it to be more prolific. People wanting it to be like used in multiple ways and not be like, confined just to food production or just to this. Like they wanted it to be used in like loads of different varieties of ways. Um and then but also that there are lots of like different visions almost about like, different factors. There are like people wanting it to go in different directions. So I think that I think one of the conclusions is that a vision for the field. I don't know the practicality of it. Um, it seems that it would be really useful, and like really like useful to trying to get like sort of to actually achieve the potentials of aquaponics and make sure being quite strategic and stuff with research and development and being like, let's invest in this. We can this is going to result in this future, or like doing cost benefits of being like, we've got these different ways we could take the technology, which one's going to result in the most optimal outcome and stuff, and kind of being strategic about it and actually doing the best, doing everything that can be done to ensure that like those potentials are actually realized. But also kind of like the challenge of that really, like what we're saying about it being so context dependent. It seems that like it's going to be super difficult to ever have like one overarching vision for aquaponics because there are so many different uses of it, and different countries have different sort of regulations, different requirements. It's going to be used in different ways across different different places, and it seems like it's going to be really quite challenging to ever come to like any sort of meaningful consensus about like sort of where aquaponics should be and what its role should be in society, because it is just it can be used in so many ways, and across the world it changes, the context changes so much. So I think that was like a major takeaway for myself, was like it's a big challenge, and maybe it needs to be sort of more regional based, of doing like multiple visions that kind of like may work in concert together. But at the same time it's still quite such a small field. It seems like a massive challenge really to ever have that kind of level of sort of cooperation, sort of strategy, you know what I mean, to ever come to like anything like meaningful. So I think it's like really I think it's like would be a really valuable thing for the field, but there'd be challenges to it, definitely.
Oh yeah, and really what it comes down to with design is what are you growing? You know, if I'm
Mm,
growing root crops, I'm not going to grow them in a DWC, right? It's not going to work.
mm,
So balancing, doing market analysis on your area and what crops you're going to grow, and then dedicating, X percentage to, you know, wicking beds, X percentage to media beds, X percentage to, dual root zones, or X percentage to, DWC, or, maybe you're going to do DWC dual root zones, whatever. But, you're going to have to figure out how much of the systems you're going to dedicate, depending on your crop choice, you're going to maximize yields. And, that's really what it comes down to primarily, at least in my opinion. But,
mm,
and that's just min-maxing, how much can I get per month,
mm. Yeah, yeah. Mm.
which I get a lot of people don't even bother doing in aquaponics, at least based on some of the stuff that I've visited, tried to clean up. All right, well, I know it's getting quite late over there in England, so we will wrap it up with you, but I appreciate it. Is the paper available publicly? If not, I can make it available on here, or if you want me to wait on that, that's fine too. Is it
Um,
up yet?
I mean, like, I haven't uploaded it anywhere. Like, it's just kind of with the university is like where like it's submitted to. But yeah, I mean, like, I'd be more than happy to put it up, and anyone that wants to speak about it or like criticize it or whatever, I'd be happy to like speak about it. Um, yeah, that'd be awesome. Just like, yeah, to just speak about it. I do think that it's an idea worth considering anyway, to investigate more in sort of the future, and investigate more like sort of the practitioners as well of aquaponics. It's like really minimal research and the actual people that are practicing aquaponics. So if anyone has any questions or would like to have any point, like from my own personal sort of struggles with the dissertation and challenges that I faced, I'd be more than happy to speak about it.
Sure. And how would people reach you if they want to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so they could probably just email me is the best way. So it's like so it's williamsjake 311 at gmail.com. But I don't know if it'd be best to send you that, Stephen, to put in the description or something.
Yeah. So we'll make sure we have that in the description, and I'll upload that here on the Google Drive, and we'll put a link to that paper here in the description as well.
Okay, awesome. Great. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate having you on. If there's anything else you want to mention or plug before you go, feel free. If not, thanks for joining us, and I'll let you go there. I know it's getting quite late.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on, Stephen. It's been like really thanks for the opportunity. It's been great to chat.
I
Uh,
appreciate it, and thanks for doing all this research on such a cool topic. It's something I think really could use more light on.
mm. Oh yeah, well, yeah, thanks so much for your participation as well.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, full disclosure, I was one of the participants of his paper. So, alrighty. Well, that was an awesome interview with Jake. You're more than welcome to take off. If not, I'm going to go over probably 5 minutes of what I've been up to, and then wrap up the show and talk about the convention coming up. So, thanks a lot. And if you need to duck out, feel free. And then if not, you're welcome to hang out.
Cool. Yeah, I might have to duck out. Sorry, Stephen. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
is
know
a
it's
bit late
quite
here.
late there. I appreciate it.
Cool. Right. Well, thanks again, Stephen, and yeah, speak to you soon as well.
Thank you. Cheers.
See you. Bye. Bye.
Take care. All right, that was really wonderful. And if you guys are looking to find out more information about aquaponics, specifically aquaponic cannabis, but if you're not a cannabis grower, just want to learn more about how to grow your flowering crops better and steal some of the great ideas that the cannabis people have been working on over the years for their aquaponic systems, be sure to check out the virtual aquaponic cannabis convention, and that will be held on October 3rd and 4th, right here on the Potent Ponics YouTube channel. And we will have a wide list of different speakers. We will have Breeder Steve, the very first person to write about aquaponic cannabis way back in 1997, back on Overgrow. He was the first person I found that had anything about it. We will also have Murray Hollum from Australia. We will also have who's done practical aquaponics. He is probably the world leader now in aquaponic systems, certainly in commercial stuff and setting up all different types of things all over the world. We will have Dr. Wilson Leonard, one of the few people that has written. He wrote a wonderful book on commercial aquaponics. He's also, one of the leaders in aquaponics. He's been doing it for over 30 years. So that'll be another great one. We got Matthew Gates, Zenthanol, the pest management guru, aficionado extraordinaire, who will come on and talk about pest management methods that will work in your aquaponic system. So aquaponic safe pest management practices and other challenges that are maybe a little bit more unique to aquaponics that aquaponic people might face. That's going to be really cool. We're going to have Roger Terry from True Aquaponics talking to us about minerals and nutrients. We'll have Angela Tenenbrock. She's a food safety expert who does help with food safety audits for aquaponic facilities, food facilities, as well as soil facilities. And she'll be with us talking about biosafety on aquaponic commercial facilities. So that'll be really cool. We'll have Marty Wydell talking from AP Meds, and this podcast talking to us about aquaponic cannabis. I'll be there talking about aquaponic cannabis. We'll be talking in depth on dual root zones, why it's required for any serious commercial production, and some other important points that I have that I want to talk about. We have Brendan Strath from both Growmore and Spectrum King Lighting. He'll be talking about both microbes and lighting. We have Leanne Keys from, or all you guys know him as Chief Cultivator over there, who's crushing it up in Habitat Life up in Canada. We'll have Josh Rutherford talking to us about large-scale aquaculture and how it can help your outdoor soil grow. So he's doing some aquaponics. He's also doing a combination of taking his large-scale aquaculture water and using it on his living soil beds to provide additional nutrients and additional growth for his living soil beds. So, kind of more of a practical application for more of you soil lovers that maybe aren't into aquaponics, but maybe want to keep some tanks of fish to maybe raise for homesteading purposes and want to be able to utilize that to increase their gardens in a living soil application. So that'll be really cool. And we have some additional guests that we'll be announcing here as we get a little sooner. A couple of people we're holding back to announce. We're going to do some kind of a little hype piece or something with them. It's going to be kind of cool. So for the last couple of guests for the show, but it'll be 2 straight days of stuff. We have giveaways from a couple of different people that'll be giving out different products. True Aquaponics, we have Recharge, we have shout out to the guys at Do Grows, and some other people are going to be helping us out with some product giveaways. I got to look in at the rest of the list here on who we have. I apologize for not having that in front of me. But we'll make sure we get up the new flyer with all the sponsors and stuff here in the next week or so. We're just finalizing everybody. But it's going to be really awesome. We'll have hour-long talks from all the wide range of different speakers, specifically on aquaponic cannabis production and related topics and that type of stuff. And then giveaways in between each speaker. It's going to be a lot of fun. Tons of people. You'll be able to ask questions. We'll have a Q&A section at the end. And then we'll have the panels in the evenings. One night we're going to do a commercial producers panel, and we're still just working on the second panel. So definitely check that out, and that'll be free for everybody. So if you just tune in, there's no charge for that. It's the time of COVID. Not everybody has that extra money right now, and we figured, what? Why don't we put some information out for free? And if you really enjoy us, I'm sure you guys will support us with our other stuff that we do that does generate things for us. So it's a great way for everyone to share knowledge and support some of the companies out there that are willing to give us some products out there for people that are maybe not need a couple extra things right now. So it's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of education, and big shout out to all the people out there that are helping put this on. It's a lot of hard work. So going to be great. So with that said, the other thing is that I've been working on a bunch of cool new stuff here in Oklahoma. We'll be ready to announce that. But if I were an Oklahoma resident, I would be out looking for some cool new products at your dispensary here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I will have an announcement soon as we have COAs. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's the first of many new cool things. So be on the lookout for that. And then what else do we have coming down the pipeline? Making leaps and bounds. Marty and I have gotten a lot of headway done. Marty and I's schedule is a little more open, so we've been chunking out the commercial class quite a bit more. It's turned into much bigger than we originally planned, but I think anyone who takes it now is completely blown away. It's freaking awesome. So that's coming along great. Chunking out the book a little bit. About to move into my new spot this week to a 5-acre spot. So that's going to be really dope. Nice big yard. Be able to set up some space down there, set up a little greenhouse and stuff once they get all set up. So that'll be fucking dope. So just all around good vibes right now. So can't complain. In many different ways, for sure. So on that note, I will wrap things up. And Doggo's doing good too. He's sound asleep next to me. So we'll wrap the show up. Be sure to check us out on Ponics and SoundCloud, iTunes, all the different places, or the video version on YouTube. And be sure to check out the virtual Aquaponic Cannabis conference. And I will make sure before the night's over to get that paper that he wrote uploaded on here in the description. Big shout out again to Jake Williams for not only compiling all that, but interviewing all those people and putting together such a wonderful paper and taking the time to join us to talk about it. So thanks a lot, and we'll catch you guys again soon. Take care. Cheers.